As Leila said, I'm Maggie Ortiz-Milan. I'm from the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute. I'm the Learning from Earthquakes Program Manager, and I'm going to describe in a little more detail kind of the way that EERI engages with clearinghouse activities. So I just want to start off with a little bit about EERI for those who might not be familiar. We're the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute. We're a global nonprofit technical membership society with about 3,000 members. We have 14 regional chapters across the US and 1 international chapter. And we have a small staff of 8 full-time staff members. And our EERI's mission is that we're dedicated to reducing earthquake risk. So a little bit about EERI members to give you a sense of kind of who makes up the organization. So we have a very diverse membership, ranging from engineers to scientists to public officials and emergency managers who serve in a variety of different roles, from academia to professional practice. And the way we organize our members are into different projects and committees that support EERI's mission to reduce earthquake risk. So we have quite a number of programs that serve the mission, and the main one that is important for today's webinar is the Learning from Earthquakes program and how that is involved with post-earthquake clearinghouses. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the Learning from Earthquakes program, or abbreviated LFE, is an earthquake reconnaissance program. We've been conducting earthquake reconnaissance since EERI was founded in 1948. The mission of the program is to accelerate and increase learning from earthquake-induced disasters that affect the natural, built, social, and political environments worldwide. So it's really about doing some of these post-earthquake investigations that Matt was mentioning, and documenting and learning from the impacts of earthquakes around the world. So before I go any further, I just want to kind of do a brief intro about reconnaissance so that it's clear what I'm talking about when I'm talking about post-earthquake reconnaissance or post-earthquake investigations. So from our standpoint, reconnaissance is really the scientific and engineering investigations aimed at documenting the important observations from an earthquake, identifying topics for future research, lessons for practice, and some of the other areas that Matt was mentioning, areas for mitigation and policy. Reconnaissance for us is not emergency response. We're not first responders. We don't want to interfere with any emergency response operations. We don't do post-earthquake building tagging. There are separate programs to systematically tag buildings and evaluate them for public safety. And we don't support detailed analysis. So if people are asking about a structure, is it safe? That's something that volunteers conducting reconnaissance are not engaging in. So Matt mentioned this document, but I wanted to say a little bit more about EERI's role in terms of U.S. earthquakes. So there is this USGS publication that outlines the NEHRP post-earthquake investigation plan, and NEHRP is the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program. And so as part of this document, there are a few specific roles for EERI, and one of the major roles is to establish a post-earthquake technical clearinghouse in coordination with the USGS and FEMA. And as I mentioned, also to identify areas that are important for future study, and also to work with the USGS to develop a summary report kind of at the 3-month later mark of an earthquake. So what are the functions that a clearinghouse can serve? So one of the main ones is to facilitate field investigations. Earthquakes provide an opportunity to really see how the built environment responds to earthquake, ground shaking. And so many people are interested, from scientists and engineers to social scientists, to be on the ground and see for themselves what are the impacts of an earthquake. And so with many people congregating in one place, the clearinghouse serves an important function to help facilitate those investigations, help coordinate researchers with one another, and also coordinate with emergency management. It provides a location to share information where people can see what others are doing in the field, and to pull in all the information that's coming in and synthesize it in a way that can be communicated to response agencies, to others who are interested in the impacts. So there are a lot of functions that the clearinghouse can serve, But one thing the Clearinghouse does not do is direct people. Everybody who comes in is a volunteer, and they may have specific objectives. They may want to be of support if there are any specific needs, but it's not the Clearinghouse's role to direct activities or kind of have a global plan for earthquake investigations, but really to facilitate investigations for those who have specific areas they want to study and observe. So there are two major parts to a clearinghouse. One is the physical clearinghouse, which is the location where people can physically come in, they can meet each other, they can sit down, they can charge their phone, they can talk directly to each other and share information. And then one is the virtual clearinghouse, which is a public-facing website where information can be distributed more broadly. It can be archived for long-term access and can be used to inform future research, mitigation, and policy efforts. So there are a few states with some plans already in place. So as Matt mentioned, California has an established clearinghouse plan. EERI serves as one of the managing partners for the California Clearinghouse, and we host the virtual clearinghouse website for the California Clearinghouse, as well as the California Clearinghouse website, which has information about recent exercises, after action reports from previous activations. And so in terms of virtual clearinghouses, Utah also has a virtual clearinghouse system that they use for multiple hazards, contains data from earthquakes. And the screenshot here is from the Wells, Nevada earthquake in 2008. So they do have a system as well that they use that we would coordinate with them after an earthquake. Idaho recently also established a clearinghouse plan. Similarly to California, EERI is one of the managing partners for that and would host the virtual clearinghouse website for an Idaho earthquake. And as part of an exercise earlier this year, along with WSPIC, we exercised that clearinghouse plan and also set up a virtual clearinghouse site for that exercise, and managed to get some kind of simulated data up to see exactly how the implementation of that would work for an earthquake in Idaho. So I want to say kind of a little bit more about the different components of the virtual clearinghouse website. So as I mentioned, they are public-facing websites. They contain photos, data, and reports from specific earthquakes. We launch a virtual clearinghouse website for major earthquakes when it's clear that there's going to be a large reconnaissance response. There's going to be a lot of science investigations, a lot of engineering observations made. When there will be a lot of data collected and available to share, that's when we would set up a dedicated website for a specific earthquake. We can set these websites up fairly quickly, and they can definitely be established within 24 hours, and kind of depending on the earthquake and the timing, they could be set up in as little as 1 to 2 hours. So it's something that can be launched very quickly so that information can be shared as soon as possible after an earthquake. And EERI started launching these virtual clearinghouse websites in 2009, and since then we've established 25 virtual clearinghouse sites for 25 different earthquakes. So some of the features of the virtual clearinghouse site, one of the main ones is this resource library. So there are many reports and data sets that can be shared after an earthquake. So it's a searchable table. You can filter it by different topics, the kind of resource, whether it's data or if it's a report or presentation. Because after an earthquake, there can be lots of resources. And so we want to make it easy to be able to find kind of the most important resources and also be able to search for anything very specific that somebody might be looking for. There's also a photo gallery, so for people who are out collecting photos, making observations after an earthquake, there's a way for them to either use an app or use our website to upload photos that they've taken, and it draws in their GPS location so it can be put on a map, and then there's additional metadata associated with each of these photos. So if somebody's searching for a specific photo, they want to see a picture of housing, see how houses perform, they can do a keyword search and they'll be shown pictures of houses as they've been captioned by people who've been out in the field. You can also do a geographic search. So if you're looking for damage in a specific area, so engineers are often want to see how damage relates to how strong the ground shaking was. So you can identify areas where the ground shaking was strong and look for pictures in that area and see how the two compare. And you can also download the data here. So you can download pictures in batches, and when you download that, you will also get a spreadsheet that has the metadata, so any captions or photographer name or anything else that's associated with those photos can be downloaded for reference for people who have another use for those photos. And the final main feature of the virtual clearinghouse website are these data maps. So it's an ArcGIS online map, so it's accessible to the public. People can go in and toggle layers. They can have an earthquake shake map that is visible or not visible. Any data layers that EERI has that people have shared with EERI can go up on this map. And then all the photos that are in the photo gallery are also displayed on this map. So the squares here you see on this map are the locations of all the photos that were taken and contained in the photo gallery. So you can click on one of those points, you get a little pop-up box that shows the caption for that photo. And if you want to see more information, there's a link to take you to see other photos in that location or find out more about what happened at that specific site. So we're trying to give people easy ways to see the data, to kind of filter through the data so they can find what's relevant to them, while at the same time being able to kind of gather and store as much information about an earthquake as possible. So recent clearinghouse activations, over the past 5 years, there have kind of been 3 that I want to mention. So the most recent was the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake sequence, which Cindy will talk more about. In 2018, Anchorage, Alaska earthquake, EERI in coordination with USGS and FEMA had sort of a smaller activation, mostly a virtual activation with some in-person meetings. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then in 2014, there was a full activation of the California Clearinghouse for the 2014 South Napa earthquake. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of give you a sense of how these clearinghouse operations go, of some of the timelines for these activations. So in 2014, the South Napa earthquake happened very early in the morning. It was 3:20 a.m. And then the chair of the clearinghouse at that time kind of got the notification and kind of woke her up, and then she immediately launched into procedures of notifying the rest of the management committee, setting up a conference call to determine if an activation was warranted. And so during a conference call early that morning, it was kind of a quick decision that it was a good opportunity to activate the earthquake. We had heard from several people of reports of damage and people interested in going to the field and people with plans already to do reconnaissance. So it was clear that there would be a need for a clearinghouse to help support those people and assist with coordination. So by 10 a.m. that morning, there was a location secured in the city of Napa where we could host a physical clearinghouse location. And then by that afternoon, there was a virtual clearinghouse website that was up and live where we could start adding resources. And then by 3 p.m. that afternoon, the physical clearinghouse location was operational. People were able to come and check in. We were getting our office set up, and we were able to host a briefing meeting that evening. So within the course of a day, that physical clearinghouse was set up. We were able to notify people, get in touch with people who were already in the field and let them know that the clearinghouse was available and that they were encouraged to come and share information and coordinate with others. So that clearinghouse was activated for 3 days, and there was a briefing each night where people could share information. That there was also a remote web connection available for people who either weren't in the field or couldn't make it back to the clearinghouse in time for the briefing that day, so a wider audience could participate in those clearinghouse meetings. And then on August 26th, so a few days later, there was the final briefing that evening, and then the clearinghouse location was deactivated. So that the South Napa earthquake was a magnitude 6.0, and that kind of 3-day time frame seemed reasonable for that response. The earthquake happened on a weekend, so many people were available. And then kind of as we got into the work week, the number of people who were in the field and coming through the clearinghouse slowed down. So it was kind of a clear decision to see that, okay, maybe we can deactivate the physical clearinghouse location, but we can continue with some of the virtual clearinghouse operations, keeping the website updated, sharing information, and things like that. And so the Anchorage earthquake kind of happened a little more slowly. The earthquake happened on November 30th in the morning. EERI is located in California, so for us it was very easy to mobilize quickly for the South Napa earthquake because of the proximity. But for this earthquake in Anchorage, we had to kind of see how things evolved a little bit more. So the earthquake happened in the morning. Right away, we're seeing some reports of damage, but given the magnitude and kind of the previous major earthquake that happened in Anchorage, we knew that people would be interested in this earthquake, so we're kind of monitoring the situation. But it was clear right away that especially people in Alaska were interested in going out and looking at what happened and making observations. So we set up a virtual clearinghouse website for the earthquake very quickly by that afternoon. And then we had some preliminary discussions with USGS and FEMA to determine how things were evolving and if we thought that there was a need to activate a physical clearinghouse. So we kind of delayed that decision a little bit. It wasn't quite clear up front, but we did the next day begin briefing calls, and we were able to work with some EERI members there to have an in-person location where people could at least come together for an evening briefing. And then we hosted those remotely from the EERI office. And so kind of starting under that model, then we reconvened with USGS and FEMA at the beginning of the next week. November 30th was on a Friday. And so we kind of had a better sense of who was there, how many people were traveling to Alaska, what there was to see, and the decision was made that we did not need to activate a physical location, but there was still a lot of interest and a lot of people, especially in Alaska, doing reconnaissance, and so we decided that these briefing calls that we were doing were still useful. So we continued them for several weeks, and the final briefing call, which was the 10th, was held on January 7th. So you can see kind of a little bit different activation than the South Napa activation. It kind of went on longer, but in a different form, more virtual operations, but still serving the function of helping to share information and coordinate people's field work. And then most recently, the 2019 Ridgecrest earthquake sequence was interesting. So the first earthquake was the 6.4 on 4th of July. So kind of the management committee was kind of scattered. People were enjoying the holiday. And so we talked with CGS, California Geological Survey, to talk about whether we should activate. And we decided it was a good opportunity to activate. And so that decision was made on the 4th. And then on the 5th, we were making preparations to get the physical clearinghouse location. We got the virtual clearinghouse website up and live, and we scheduled the first briefing call for that evening. And then during the first briefing call, the magnitude 7.1 earthquake happened and kind of changed things a little bit. A larger magnitude earthquake, more people became interested in the earthquake. So we thought that maybe kind of given the initial magnitude of the earthquake and the more remote location where it was the impacts were concentrated, we thought maybe a shorter clearinghouse activation, kind of similar to the South Napa earthquake of 3 days, would be what we were anticipating. But that 7.1 earthquake kind of changed things. And so the clearinghouse was actually activated for a full week, with many people coming in throughout the week. And similarly to Alaska, we are also hosting these briefing calls. And so for this sequence, we held 9 briefing calls, and the last one was held on August 12th. So over a period of 6 weeks, we were conducting those briefing calls. And then shortly after that briefing call, there was a briefing webinar where all the information that was coming in from teams in the field was able to be shared out more broadly to the EERI membership and earthquake risk reduction community. So quickly, I just want to go over some of the outcomes from a clearinghouse, and I know Matt has talked a little bit about this. So I won't spend too much time, but so data collected and information collected through a clearinghouse, it really captures information that could be lost very quickly. Damage to building are cleaned up very quickly as part of emergency response, and so it's important to get out there quickly and document things. What's learned can be used to inform future research, identify future areas for mitigation, inform emergency operations, and also identify concerns for public safety. So just a few examples from some of the earthquakes I mentioned. In the South Napa earthquake, there were clearinghouse participants who were out in the downtown area. They were looking at buildings, and you can see in this picture there's some posts here, and there's some yellow caution tape that was serving as the barricading for some of these damaged buildings. And if you notice on the street there, you can see some debris on the other side of the barricading. And so that's something that clearinghouse participants mentioned in a briefing, and they said if there's an aftershock and somebody's clear of the barricading but still very close to the building, it could be a public safety concern. So that was communicated to the state emergency management, and that then kind of come back around to the county as a public safety concern. So things like that are things that maybe an engineer would notice if they're looking out at a building. That is very useful for emergency operations. There was also an issue of afterslip that was near some infrastructure, so the ground continued to move and was alerted to emergency management as something to monitor because there was infrastructure nearby. And so I think those just kind of clearly demonstrate how having engineers and scientists in the field can alert other stakeholders of things that are of importance to them, even if they may not be at that moment interested in the technical details of the observations they're making. In the Alaska earthquake, one of the major things that became clear right away was the difference in performance of buildings, and especially homes in areas where building codes weren't enforced. And so this picture shows a building where a foundation connection just kind of became clear apart. And seeing those pictures compared to areas where the building codes were enforced kind of really highlighted the importance of building codes and the effects those have on building being able to withstand these earthquake forces. And finally, in the Ridgecrest earthquake, as engineers were walking around looking at buildings, they identified an untagged structure with severe damage. From the outside, you can see this picture on the left. From the outside, you wouldn't be able to tell it was damaged. And so kind of taking a little bit closer look, seeing the inside of the building, recognizing, okay, there's some serious structural damage here. This really should be tagged. And so alerting local officials of that so that that building could be tagged and the public is protected from entering a building, especially with that Ridgecrest earthquake sequence where aftershocks continued for some time. It was really important that that was flagged by volunteers at the clearinghouse for local officials. And another thing is it also, as that building was untagged, it also uncovered some gaps in local knowledge of some state building tagging protocols that exist in California. And so I think that's leading to some additional outreach for cities in the state so that they're aware of some of the resources that are available following an earthquake. So I think the slides will be shared with everyone, so I just wanted to include a few links to get you to some of the sites that I've mentioned. But that's kind of a quick overview of how EERI interacts with post-earthquake clearinghouses and some of the functions we try to serve and how some of the data that's collected can be used to advance mitigation and improve research in the area of earthquake risk reduction. So thank you everybody for your attention, and my contact information is also here if you have any follow-up questions. I'd be happy if you reached out to me. Thank you.